Here is one of a series of talks by spiritual leader Lola McDowell Lee, spanning 2 decades from the early 70s through the 90s. Lola was a Zen Roshi, whose Rinzai lineage included Dr. Henry Plutov and renowned Zen master Shigetsu Sasaki. Lola was a religious scholar as well as an ordained Christian minister. While the talks are focused mainly on Zen and Buddhism, Lola drew on many spiritual traditions, including those of Jesus, Plato, Lao Tzu, the Hindu Vedas, Meister Eckhart, and Gurdjieff.
A very puzzled monk came once to Fuketsu and said to him, "You say that truth can be expressed without speaking and without keeping silent. How can this be?" And Fuketsu answered him by saying, "In southern China, in the spring, when I was only a lad, how the birds sang among the blossoms." Now, this world that is rendered to our senses, which Kant called the phenomenal world, the world that we see and hear and touch and taste, smell and so on, the world is. Regardless of how it appears to you, and that these appearances change, but within that appearance, the world is. It's like truth is. It is. And love is. When the reality is seen, it is. Existence is. This world is. But upon seeing it, upon perceiving it, what is one to say? How can one say it? There is no word that can really express it. I mean, you can say truth and truth and truth and truth, but to whomever you are saying it will interpret it as something they conceive of as truth, unless they have glimpsed also. So, what to say? So it's a great dilemma for those teachers. And those of you who come to meditation, you must come to confrontation, and you must say. You must show somehow what is. And it can't be said. So what is? Sometimes, sitting for meditation, an experience begins and grows and gradually floods through one. And it begins to overflow so that one cannot keep silent about it. One has to say something to somebody. Well, what are you going to say? Well, I had this thing happen, but I don't know how to tell you. I don't know what happened, but something happened. What happened? It's like it's a very famous koan, little problem, to observe the monk who was running up in the mountains, and he fell over a cliff. And as he was plunging down, he happened to catch with his teeth. He caught a little strawberry plant that was growing there. And it saved him, from the rest of the fall, into this plunge into this abyss or this chasm. And here he's hanging on for dear life with his teeth, trying to get a hold of the cliff so he can get up again. And along comes his Roshi, who looks down at him and says, well, what is Zen? And he's got to answer. Now, how is he going to answer? And sometimes, they say, what is Buddha? You're hanging there for dear life. What is the Buddha? Face to face, directly seeing, the immediate, face to face. Truth isn't a word. Love isn't a word. But they're not just dead, dull silences either. They're not dead and dull. Face to face, there's something that rises in us to respond, let us say, to truth. It's full of joy. Love is full of joy. It's the world singing, the birds and the blossoms. Now, there are many people who try to talk about their experiences. Maybe they've had lots of experiences. Maybe they've had all kinds of them. But if they're trying to talk about it and in using their words, there is no silence in the word. There is no silence represented in the word. Then the words are they're dull, they're dead stones. They don't have this quality in them, this quality of silence. You know the quality of silence? When a word has the quality of silence in it, right from it, then that word can be very penetrating. And if someone uses a word with you that has this silence at its core, the word can hang with you. And then one day, thinking about something altogether different, here comes this, oh, yes. That's what it meant. Because someone that verbalizes out of the silence, or a crow caws in the silence, it's just not throwing dead rocks at you. It's more like throwing flowers that you can have the aroma of if you're vulnerable. Those who know say they cannot say. Lao Tzu put it very simply. He says, one who knows does not talk. One who talks does not know. See? I go home, Annie. Therefore, the sage keeps his mouth shut and his sense gates closed. And this is called profound identification. Now, gestures also carry a silence. And in the Eastern tradition, these gestures are very often called mudras, just as we have the word mantra for something that we repeat over and over and over. But the gesture then is a mudra. And let us say that you see pictures of the Buddha, and his right hand is on his cheek, and his left hand is just lying in his lap. It's called the Dorji Mudra. It's a posture of equilibrium. And there is the menacing mudra. We all know that one. Over here we call it judging. You're judging me. The menacing mudra. And, even in the Kabbalistic thing, we have the fingers used as a sword to do the pentagrams and to cut away, with what we don't want in our conditioning. They use it, It's used as a sword that cuts through. And all the traditions speak about a sword one way or the other. And Roshi has a sword that he cuts through. It's a sword of wisdom. And Jesus said, you know, I come not to bring peace, but a sword. You cut through, huh? And then there is the witnessing mudra, which is the left hand again is in the lap, but the right hand is touching the earth. Because when Buddha achieved his enlightenment, he was asked who was witness thereto. You know, I mean, when you have an experience, you come, you know, as witness. Someone has to verify it, to validate it, to say, okay, that was a real experience and not something that you dabbling around with in your head. So, and Buddha said, you know, when he was asked, who was witness? And he says, this very earth is my witness. Now, in Tibet, there's a Buddhist sect, and they're called the followers of the apostolic succession, or the Maha Mudra sect. The mudras are used generally in this context by a teacher to impart some understanding to a student. One makes a gesture with his hand, or one can use any part of the body as far as that goes, you know. Ordinarily, though, it's the hand. And if the teacher, whoever who gestures, has glimpsed, let us say, has experienced, then the gesture becomes a great gesture, and it's called a Maha Mudra, you know, great Maha Mudra. So this followers of the apostolic succession are the Maha Mudra sect, which is another term in Mahayana Buddhism for nirvana. Nirvana, nir meaning no, and no, blown out, no. Now, when a word is used by someone who knows, and a word then has this silence in it, then you have to go within yourself to find the meaning of it. You can't go to a dictionary and you can't go to encyclopedia, because the meaning then will be found in your own understanding. In your understanding, you will perceive the signature. I can remember a teacher that I had, and I asked him a question, and we were sitting outside under a tree, and he started to speak to me, and I thought, I don't understand what he's saying. So I sat there, and I began to go within myself. And the more he spoke, the more I went in. And the more I went in, the more understanding began to rise. And every time a certain understanding would arise, he'd stop and he'd say, shall I go further? And finally, I said something to him. And but this is the way I began to understand what the word Tao means. I mean, it's more than just, you know, Tao is translated as way. Way, it's a way, it's a path. But Tao is Tao, and there's, who's going to say anything about it? Way. You know, Tao is. We live in it. It's like truth is, and we live in it. In the Christian Bible, it reads that in the beginning there was a Word. And by that they mean a fiat, a carrier. It's a sanction, meaning to be done. It's a fiat, word, to be done. In the Vedas it says, In the beginning, there was silence, eternal silence, and the silence brooded over the sea, and it was dark. And in Christianity, we find the Spirit of God walked on the water and said, "Let there be light." You see, this was the sanction. Now, it was not some huge man stumbling around up there, trying not to get his feet wet. But more like clear light dancing. And it's called the beginning of creation. And it's still going on. Nothing has stopped. Right this minute. You snap your fingers, it's going on, and it's still going on after you stop snapping your fingers. You know, like the Upanishads say, one unmoving that is swifter in mind. That moves and that moves not. That is far and the same as near. That is within all this, and that also is outside all this. That moving is our existence. That let there be light. That moving is our existence. Aurobindo put it a little differently. If any of you have read Savitri, he says, it was the hour before the gods awake. Across the path of the divine event, the huge foreboding mind of night, alone in her unlit temple of eternity, lay stretched immobile upon silence marge. Almost one felt opaque, impenetrable in the sombre symbol of her eyeless muse, the abysm of the unbodied infinite. A fathomless zero occupied the world, a power of fallen, boundless self-awake between the first and the last nothingness, recalling the dark womb from which it came, turned from the insoluble mystery of birth and the tardy process of mortality, and longed to reach its end in vacant naught. The impassive skies were neutral, empty, still. Then something in the inscrutable darkness stirred, a nameless movement, an unthought idea, insistent, dissatisfied, without an aim, something that wished but knew not how to be, teased the inconscient to wake ignorance. An unshaped consciousness desired light. As if a childlike finger laid on a cheek reminded of the endless need in things, an infant longing clutched the somber vast. Insensibly, somewhere, a breach began, a long, lone line of hesitating hue, like a vague smile tempting a desert heart, troubled the far rim of life's obscure sleep. An eye of deity pierced through the dumb deeps. That's his hour before the gods awake. Come on. Huh? Wake up. Wake up. So, now, when you talk, say what you have to say, and don't babble. Above all, don't wobble. Don't talk as if you know, if you don't know. But then also, just being silent doesn't seem to help either. There are those who think, Well, now they tell me that silence is very powerful. So I'm not going to say anything. Why should I go on talking? I'm going to be silent and be powerful. Yeah. So I'm going to try to keep quiet. But the thing is, those words still keep on going around in here. Round and round and round, huh? You know, sometimes you can become a madhouse of words when you're agitated. You can't even keep up with them. They're going by so fast. Simply looking at the word silent is not silence. You may drop some words, but the mind keeps right on chattering, huh? And we have all experienced having a problem. There isn't anybody that goes all the way through life without a problem. And then you try to go to sleep at night, and the mind just chews and chews and chews at it. Because, you know, if you don't talk to somebody else about it, it's going to talk to itself. Always. Now, but if you are silent, I mean really silent from within, that's a very different story. And it is not, you cannot say it is my silence. It doesn't belong to you. It's the silence of the universe. It's the silence of nature. It's the silence of the depths. It's the silence of this power of the limitless, boundless. No time and no space. You know, this is this hour before the gods awake. Silence. In that silence, you can hear the soundless sound. In that silence, they say God delivers his message. After the Buddha, you know, he had 28 successors, towering men who achieved enlightenment. Some more towering than others, because not all trees grow the same. You know. But anyway, the 27th successor after the Buddha, the 27th Patriarch in India, was a man called Prajnatara, or we would say Hanyatara. And there was a king in southern India who had heard of him and requested that he come to the court. He said, you know, to the effect, please come and bless us. It has been my desire to listen to some of the sutras of Gautama the Buddha, you know, by a man who is a Buddha also. So Hanyatara went to the king's court with his attendant. And the king was so thrilled, you know. His whole life he had this dream, you know, to have a Buddha in the palace reciting. So the palace was decorated and everyone was celebrating, and it was a great day of joy and feasting. And the presentation begins. Hanyatara bows before the king and introduces his attendant, and then he seats himself. The king is on the throne, seated. Hanyatara is seated on the floor, and the attendant is standing there. And the attendant then begins to recite the sutra. And the king listens. And then there's a little frown appears right here on his face, we say. There is a puzzlement begins to show. This was not at all how he had planned it. The king could have found any number of people to recite this sutra, and recite it even better than this attendant. After all, look at that attendant. He's just an attendant who looks after Hanyatara. We use him to do small errands. He's very ordinary. He's not even a scholar. What's he doing reciting the sutra? See? His pronunciation wasn't exactly as it should have been. This was not what he had planned. But out of respect to the king, he kept quiet. And so this attendant recited the whole sutra, and when it was all finished, Prajnatara looked at the king, and the king said to him, Sir, will you enlighten me about this, please? Otherwise, I will just remain puzzled. Why didn't you recite the sutra? And Prajnatara said, recite the sutra? But that's what I was doing the whole time. And this puzzled the king even more, you know. Why, he had seen the man sitting on the floor there. He hadn't said a single word, you know. So would you please explain? Prajnatara says, I was sitting silently. I was sitting in silence, breathing in silence. What else is there? There is silence, there is a breath, there is awareness. And the king thought back, and retrospectively he realized that this man had not been silent in an ordinary way. There was something very special about his silence. There had been something else in it. There was a power in it. And he remembered then, too, that out of the corner of his eye, he could see that the breathing was so natural and so quiet, you know, like a baby breathing. I think you are all aware that our breathing shows our moods. It shows our attitudes. If you're angry, your breathing changes. Now, we all know that. Doesn't take much to figure that out. We've seen it happen with us. But greed also changes the breathing. Moods govern our breathing. Next time you get angry about something, try not disturbing the breath. Just keep on breathing quite naturally and see what happens. Naturally breathing. No mood, no condition, no anger, no greed, no lust, no jealousy, no mind. Then it is of a different quality. It's like there's a flame, you know, without any smoke. Anyway, this king was so grateful for this whole thing that had been explained to him and everything, and that he saw more even than the sutra would have given him because of this silence. So he presented Prajnatara with a diamond, huge, rare diamond. And he said to him, I have 3 sons. Sir, be kind enough, bless them. And so the 3 princes came in. But instead of blessing them, Prajnatara showed them the diamond. And the first prince, he looked at it. He was the eldest. He was about 15, three boys. He says, beautiful diamond. It's very rare. The second prince was about 10, and he looked at it, and he says, it's not only the finest, it's the best. It belongs to my father. It's the best, see? To protect this diamond, you're going to need an army, not just an attendant. You know? So the third son, he's only 11, he comes up and he looks at the stone and he says, and he begins to laugh. And he says, why are you trying to fool me? Real diamonds are never outside. You have the real diamond within you. And compared to that, this is just a stone. So the legend goes on that Prajnatara hugged this little boy and saying, this one will be my successor. Now his name was Bodhitara, and Prajnatara changed his name to Bodhidharma. That's a legend, huh? But it has value. You know, the value is the silent sermon. a very telling silence. We learn to listen to the silence. And we find that truth has never been and never will be hidden. From the beginningless beginning, nothing is hidden. Truth as it is being preached at us from every tree, from every bird, from every rock, from every flower, and from every other human being. You know, our eyes and our ears, somehow, they don't seem to be open enough to see this. We're deaf, but the truth is not hidden. It's like the man who came to a Roshi and said, "Sir, where should I go to find the truth?" And the Roshi said, "You just keep looking in front of your nose and you'll find it." Just in front of your nose, right here. See, everywhere you look, your nose goes with you. You're looking at it all the time. The problem is when we hear it, we usually interpret it as something else. Because we hear according to ourselves. We hear according to our state of consciousness. And the mind turns on and we keep right on missing. Because we're listening to the mind and not listening. And you think, oh, this is a moment of silence. And if you think that, you've already missed. Because the moment that you think that, it's gone, it's past. And if you go to a Roshi and ask about it, well, you know, it's not predictable what he's going to do. He could hit you, he could hit himself, or he may say something nonsensical, seemingly very absurd, like asking Bodhidharma, you know, how does one attain Buddhahood? You know, and he says, there's a tree in the garden. Now what? How are you going to relate the tree in the garden to the Buddha? Or the stone in the garden? Or the rock in the water? How does any of that relate to the Buddha? And the little monk comes to the Roshi and you know, asks, what is the way? And the Roshi says, listen. So the monk gets very quiet. And by the side of the master's house, there is this fountain, and the water, we say, is making a sound. We hear the sound of running water. Now, where is the sound? Is it in the water or is it in you? Roshi says, listen. This is the way. And the little monk thinks, the sound of running water is the way? See, he's missed. Bring the mind to the immediate, what is right here, right now. Because actually that Roshi is not saying anything at all about running water. But the listen, you know, it's out of context. It's not related to the question. Listen, this is the way. If you can listen immediately, you got the hair of the tail of the dog, as they say. Well, it's like this Western psychiatrist that went to Japan, and he questioned around in the temples and said, how do you deal with neurotics? You know, and one of the Roshi says, oh, I just simply trap them. Well, how? Well, I get them to where they can't ask any questions anymore. You know, I trap them. And if you're trapped, the thinking stops. And if the mind is allowed to ask this, and then ask that, and then ask the other thing, you know, it just goes on and on and on, and this big wheel going around, huh? You go in and you ask, you know, how did God create the world? And the Roshi hits you. You know, and for a moment you're very shocked. And in that moment of shock, all the thinking stops. And there's silence. And if you can listen to that, you've got something. That particular moment was immediate. Everything came to a stop. You could see, you could hear. It's the same thing. Roshi asked, you know, how do you realize when you hear the sound of the bell? What are you going to think? There's nothing to think about. So listen. What can you do with silence except listen? This listening to the silence is a way of perception. It's a way of perceiving. Just as we perceive with the eyes, we can perceive with the ears. It is a way of understanding. Listen. How? You know, with what? What am I hearing? The ears? No, with the mind. Mind that is unmodified, unconditioned, unshaped. Mind naked, immaculate, and clear. Clear light mind, huh? Mind without any duality. Timeless, uncompounded, unimpeded, colorless, clear mind. Listen. There is the unity of all things. In the Tibetan Buddhism, we find this. One mind, being verily of the void and without any foundation, as empty as the sky. To know whether this be so or not, look within your own mind. Being of the void, self-born wisdom has in reality been shining forever. To know whether this is so or not, look within your own mind. Divine wisdom is indestructible, unbreakable, like the ever-flowing current of a river. To know whether this be so or not, look within thine own mind. All appearances are one's own concepts, self-conceived in the mind, like reflections seen in a mirror. To know whether this be so or not, look within thine own mind. Arising of themselves and being naturally free like the clouds in the sky, all external appearances verily fade away into their own respective places. To know whether this be so or not, look within thine own mind. This self-oriented, clear light mind, eternally unborn, is a parentless babe of wisdom. Wondrous is this. Being non-created, it is natural wisdom. Wondrous is this. Not having known birth, it knows not death. Wondrous is this. Although it is total reality, there is no perceiver of it. Wondrous is this. Although wandering in samsara, it remains undefiled by evil. Wondrous is this. Although seeing the Buddha, it remains unallied to good. Wondrous is this. Although possessed by all beings, it is not recognized. Wondrous is this. Those not knowing the fruit of meditation seek other fruit. Wondrous is this. Although the clear light of reality shines within one's own mind, the multitude look for it elsewhere. Wondrous is this. Listen to the clear light. And now, may the peace and the power that passeth all understanding hold us and keep us in the love of the Christed consciousness while we are seemingly separate one from another. And I thank you very much.
If you find Lola's talks valuable, more will be posted in weeks to come.